Every once in a while, a new piece of PC hardware arrives, and I look at it and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Or why didn't somebody else think of that? They should have done this a long time ago. And case in point, Cooler Master has a new SF series of fans, which are square fans. That's a little bit less innovative. What I think was sort of unique and yeah, kind of gave me the feeling of like, why wasn't this done before? They've done a dual fan version and a triple fan version.
Excellent!
So most computers have at least a few fans to move air through the system to keep things cool. That's their primary function. They also serve to introduce dust into the system and, as is often the case now since all-in-one liquid coolers have become more popular, to cool down the radiators that have liquid flowing through them. Most radiators are going to have at least 2, sometimes 3 fans, sometimes as little as 1. But for those that use 2 fans or 3 fans, if you've ever gone through the installation procedure, you know that it can just be a little bit complicated, especially getting them all in position, wiring them all up properly. And now that RGB is pretty much everywhere, you now have possibly a second set of cables, not just connecting up the power so that the fans spin, but also RGB. And sometimes you might have addressable RGB that is even a little bit more complicated. So to simplify things for the installation procedure, as well as connecting up those precious RGB LEDs, we have this solution in the SF240P and the SF360R. Now you might notice that the P options are here on my right and the R options are on the left. That's simply because there's a different setup for the addressable RGB LEDs. These fans over here have 8 LEDs per fan, and then these on the right have 24 individual addressable LEDs per fan if you're looking at a single 120mm version, and then this fatty SF240P actually has 56 because they added individual addressable RGB LEDs around the edge too, which I think might look pretty cool. But let's get these out of these boxes, take a closer look. So the actual functional part of all of these products would be the fans at the center, and the fans at the center are pretty much all the same with some slight variance in fan speed and static pressure as far as the box ratings go at least. These are all rifle bearing fans and they're all rated at 8 to 30 dBA when it comes to the noise level. They're all 4-pin PWM controllable fans as indicated by their plug, as well as of course the packaging. And it looks like Cooler Master is sticking to 120mm size for this product lineup, at least for now. Rotational speeds are 650 to 2400 RPMs for the P series over here, and then it drops to 2000 RPMs on the SF120R, and then down to 1800 RPM for the triple fan version here, although the fact that you have more fans is going to overall produce more airflow, the SF360R. Beyond that, the fan blades themselves, according to Cooler Master, are designed with inspiration from helicopters and jet planes, although I think they're just saying that so it sounds more badass. And then outside of those fan blades is of course the fan housing, and the SF series that all of these are part of this trend to go back to a more square style fan housing, which honestly they used to do a lot more, and then they feel like a lot of fan manufacturers started to get fancy with the housing around here and make it like look different. But honestly, especially if you're putting this up against a radiator or as an intake in your case or anything, you want as little space or gaps for air to get through apart from where the fan is actually pulling the air through as possible. And the square design is supposed to line up with radiators, line up with fan intakes on the case or exhausts, so you get the most air flowing through the airflowy part versus leaking out elsewhere. Another design consideration for all these fans is that they have put rubberized pads on all the contact points, front and back, so that is nice as well. That's not the most crazy innovative feature or anything. A lot of fans have been doing that for a while, but it is good to have that, especially for reduction of vibration, and again, especially if you have this fan or fan assembly mounted up against a radiator. Then the last thing I was looking for when it comes to accessories is the ability to chain the fans together, according to Cooler Master, and that is actually only on these little 120mm versions, which I guess makes a little bit more sense because you're more likely to want to chain them together. Basically, all this means is that if you have an addressable RGB header or extension coming from your motherboard, the little 3-pin kind, you can plug it in right there, and it's got a little extra one coming off right there, so you could daisy chain more addressable RGB LEDs to that. So that is convenient, especially if you're connecting up multiple fans and you're not going for the integrated triple or dual fan combo. Other than that, the 120mm fans come with mounting screws. These bigger ones come with mounting screws as well as this little plastic piece, which is actually made to go over your addressable RGB LED headers. You connect them up, pop them into that, and then that keeps them from pulling loose. I actually think that's pretty useful. I have taken addressable RGB LED headers in cases and taped them together simply because there's nothing to really hold them and they can pop loose easily. So this is just a nice little piece, makes it a little bit more more professional. Also, it'd be a little bit more clean if you had to do a connection like this somewhere where it was visible. Finally, the 360mm version here, the SF360R, does come with an addressable RGB LED controller. Just plugs in via a SATA power connector and then gives you the addressable RGB LED header for that. So if you don't have the capability from your motherboard to connect that in, you can use this. It's just got a single button so you can cycle through some basic lighting profiles. So we spent some time doing some basic setup with these fan arrays, fan grids, whatever you want to call them, just to give you guys a little bit better idea of how they work and everything. First thing I wanted to point out here is that there is actually a difference between the SF120R fans. Just fan blades themselves are the different style than all the other fans that I mentioned. And I only want to bring that up because I said at the beginning that all the fans themselves are the same. There is some slight variation there. Just so we could fire up the fans and the RGB LEDs, I have connected up this Zalman ZM MFC3 multi-fan controller, which does have a PWM out so you can control the RPMs with it. And then I'm using this little RGB LED controller, which is compatible with addressable RGB LEDs, and that actually came with this Cooler Master 240 all-in-one liquid cooler. I do want to point out that when it comes to the RGB LED controller that ships with the triple fan version of the 360R up here, it is a simpler controller, and this actually will only support up to, it seems, 24 addressable RGB LEDs. And I discovered that because I connected it up to the 240p here, which has 56 addressable RGB LEDs and only about half of them lit up. I was worried that the unit itself was defective, but then I just switched to a different controller and all of the LEDs started. So just keep that in mind. If you do get the 360 version of this, you're not going to be able to use that controller to daisy chain additional RGB LED devices from it. So just want to keep that in mind. To give you guys a little bit better idea of how this will look when actually connected up to Radiator, I connected it to Radiator. This is the Cooler Master ML240R RGB, and I've connected up the SF240P ARGB dual fan to it, just so you can see it does line up. I do want to point out that when it comes to radiators, there is some variance when it comes to the actual mounting holes from them. There especially can be some difference in the gap between the holes for the two different fans, and these fans do actually have slightly elongated holes for mounting there, so that should provide a little bit more compatibility depending on what type of radiator you're connecting it up to. I think this configuration might be particularly appealing to people who are really into the RGB LED thing, because it gives you this nice long light bar that's going to point sideways out of your case. So if you have a case with a nice big clear window, you should be able to see that, and it should be pretty visible. And of course you can switch around between the different color cycles and color patterns. I'm just using the controller that I have here, which has a limited number, but if you directly connect, it has compatibility for like Asus Aura Sync, as well as MSI, Gigabyte, and ASRock's software for controlling RGB LEDs, so you might have more options available there. Over in this system here, which we're in the process of disassembling, but it does still have the all-in-one liquid cooler installed, which is a Cooler Master 360mm AIO, which is being used to cool a 9900K. We were able to quickly see that there is a definite plus when it comes to ease of installation, because the three fans that were on there, we all had to remove individually, and then each fan had two cables that were wired up to the back. After getting all three removed, it was just a matter of holding that entire unit up there together, so like just a couple screws to kind of hold it in place. Then we were able to go and mount the rest of them, and then again just two cables to pass through to the back to connect up for the power for the fans and the addressable RGB LEDs. So that, I think, is the biggest selling point of these sort of combo units here, and one of the things where you're like, oh, of course, if that's what you're planning to use it for, it makes perfect sense to buy this type of fan configuration, because you know it's going to be self-contained, and if you're dealing with sort of a nightmare cable management scenario, it really does simplify connecting up all the fans and all the LEDs and getting them to work. Now, a thing that I need to point out, I can't leave this video without mentioning to you guys, is that both of these units were exhibiting some electrical noise, sort of a high-pitched whining noise. I think had to do with the PWM frequency depending on the RPMs we were running them at. When we have the fans turned up most of the way, that seems to fade away, but when the fans are running at medium and low speed, there was a definite noise that I was hearing. And it was the same on both units. So I'm going to contact Cooler Master about that and let them know. I'll wait to hear back from them and then update in the comment section down below if they have anything to say about that. Oftentimes, early samples can have problems like this, but then they fix that for the retail run, but I'll hopefully confirm that and let you guys know. That potential manufacturing defect aside, what are the sort of pros and cons to going with a configuration like this as opposed to buying your own individual 120mm fans? The pros, of course, are going to be that ease of installation, and then for a configuration like this, I'd say a visual look that you can't really get going with normal fans. You can't have a uniform LED display like this. I have seen add-on LED devices that you can do sort of something similar to this, but I would say this is unique, at least in my experience. The negatives are going to be, first off, that if you have any errors with any of the fans, like I'd say especially in the triple fan unit, if one of those fans goes bad or starts to develop a rattle or a hum or something like that, you're probably going to need to replace the entire unit, and that may or may not be a matter of great inconvenience for you. And then of course you have the fact that you're going to be locked into sort of a larger or medium-sized form factor if you're going with a 240 or 360 version of this. If you, for example, swapped out your AIO in the future to a 240mm version, or if you went with a larger like 280, for example, you would either have to have a weird overlapping situation where your triple fan sticks out longer than your radiator, or you just wouldn't be able to use it anymore because it doesn't fit the new sized radiator that you're changing to. So to kind of sum up, if my question at the beginning of this video was, why hasn't anyone really done this before? I would say kind of the pros and cons outweigh each other if you're not dealing with addressable RGB LEDs. Just having to connect up 3 fans and install and mount 3 fans really isn't that big of a deal. But when you add in the cabling that's required for connecting up multiple addressable RGB LEDs, and the fact that these are all just automatically going to be in sequence with each other, I think that adds some value and some convenience that makes these a lot more practical in today's market than they maybe were 3 or 4 years ago before RGB was everywhere. One other potential positive for the multi-fan units is price, or the possibility that you're buying in bulk, so maybe you're getting a better price per fan. Of course, that's somewhat subjective based on the prices that were listed. The Cooler Master 120mm ARGB SF series fan is $35 by itself, which is pretty steep for a single fan, but you could get 2 of them in the Masterfan SF240p that I've been showing you for a mere $55, at least according to the current prices on Amazon. So that is a savings of $15 if you were to buy 2 of the $35 fans for $70 or 1 dual unit for $55. Similarly, the SF120R fans are $25 each, which again is a little on the steep side for a fan, but you know, they're Pro Series fans and they've got RGB and everything. But 3 of those, of course, would then cost you $75, or the triple fan version, another savings here of I guess about $11 or $12 because it's currently $63.45 on Amazon. So that may or may not be a selling point for you. So if you guys are interested, I'll post some links to these SF series fans down in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and let me know what you think of these fans, especially the 2 and 3 fan units of them. Are you interested, assuming they fix that electrical noise whiny issue? And if so, let me know why, and if not, let me know why not as well. Thanks again for watching this video, guys. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out, and we'll see you next time.